The coolest thing I want you to start with is what we talked about yesterday at lunch. Do you remember that conversation?
We talked about a lot.
Yesterday, I was listening to a podcast when I was coming back from a coffee date. And I was listening to a podcast that was talking about how people who are like incredibly successful, they can look back at like one moment in childhood and it kind of like really shows the impact of where they are professionally now. So at lunch yesterday, you were telling a story about something that happened to you as a kid that really kind of was a defining moment now as an older, professional.
You're talking about calling grocery stores to sell cantaloupes?
I'm talking about the cantaloupes the size of basketballs.
So it's really not a huge deal, but it really kind of gave me some insight that I had. I would say no fear more than anything. I wouldn't say a lot of talent, but just no fear. I grew up on a farm, started pulling weeds in a strawberry patch when I was 12 years old. I was really tan from the waist up because I wore jeans the whole time I was doing that. This was a farm that was back then they called it a truck patch. So we had strawberries, I think 3 acres of strawberries. We had sweet corn. We had cantaloupes. We planted 3,300 apple trees. So it really was. It was a grain farm, soybeans and corn. But to diversify revenue streams back then, they also included a lot of what they called truck patch. So anywhere from the strawberries to other commodities at the time. Well, that's when I was 12. Well, by the time I got 14, I was very familiar with what we were doing. And this is Howe Farms out of Middletown, Indiana. And Dave, who was the owner, asked me to come in because we had all of these cantaloupes. And I don't know if you're familiar with Indiana cantaloupes, but they truly can get as big as a basketball. And we had hundreds of them. And he realized that we weren't going to get enough people to come to the farm to buy them. We needed to go retail. And so he said, we're going to call grocery stores today. And so I just grabbed the yellow pages back then and started making cold calls to grocery stores. And I can remember being on the phone with, I didn't even care who answered the phone. Didn't matter to me. Said, we're with Howe Farms. We grow cantaloupes as big as basketballs. And next thing you know, they're saying, yeah, we'll take this crate, this crate, this crate. I even told them, I said, we can bring some over so you can look at them. Nope, if they're local grown, we'll take them. Now, this was like Harvest Market. It wasn't the big chains back then. Mm-hmm. I want to say we even sold to Marsh, which was out of Yorktown, Indiana at the time. And we just had some success. And I thought to myself, well, this is fairly easy. So if I were to really look back and go, that's kind of where my sales career started, was, I can talk to people, which was a gift that I got from my dad, mm-hmm. who I think got it from his dad, who was a Jewel T truck driver back in the 30s and 40s. So I'm not saying it's genetics, but I just didn't have enough fear to do it. And I think that was the big key. And then you just say, here's my product. Do you have an interest? And you get enough no's out of the way, eventually a yes shows up. So dialing for dollars at 14 to grocery stores.
Yeah, and I think one of my favorite parts of, if we think of your whole story, is that didn't really catch up right away. When you were 18, you did you go to Hobart straight out of school, or did you went to Purdue? So you went to school for ag econ.
Yep.
One of my favorite stories. So there is a story that you have at Purdue that at the end of the year, they had you do a public speaking piece? Or how does that story go?
No, it wasn't at the end of the year. It was graduation.
Okay.
So I'd been on campus, and the farm kids were easy to pick out, probably still are today, were the kids running around with flannel shirts and seed corn hats. And, the ag school, much like engineering, much like nursing and so forth, I mean, you kind of get to know who's in that school and the leadership of that school. And this was based on the ag's graduation. And they came to me and said, we'd like for you to give the invocation. Now, back then, I will tell you, I was not a very religious guy. There were certainly more qualified individuals in my class. And I said, are you sure? And they said, yeah, we'd like for you to give the invocation. So I'm not sure I'd ever prayed out loud at that point in my life, much less in front of however many people. And so I went to one of my classmates that I knew was a churchgoer, and I said, they've asked me to do this. And he looked at me and he go, you? Why you? I go, I have no idea, but they've asked me to do it. I need help. And so we sat down and we wrote a prayer. I couldn't tell you what I even said, probably while I was saying it. That's how nervous I was. And they talk about, if you really get nervous, your knees, touch. It's true. My knees were literally touching while I was up there. Now, one of the proud moments is my grandmother, mom and dad were all at the graduation. And I think grandma, who was the most religious person I knew at the time, was like, I can't believe they're asking Mike to do this, but get it done, make it good. And so that was the first time I ever spoke in front of, I would say more than 4 or 5 people, buddies that you ran with. And would I say it was a good experience? It scared the daylights out of me, honestly. But we got through it, and then we moved on.
So did you go to school for sales?
Oh, no.
What was the original degree pattern?
So,
what do you want to be when you grow up?
Farmer.
Yeah.
I wanted to come back and farm. I wanted to do 2 things. I wanted to coach high school wrestling, and I wanted to farm. And anybody that watches this is probably pretty young, but coming out of the 70s into the early 80s, you probably heard of Farm Aid. The reason why Farm Aid had even started was people were losing farms. Agriculture was on a major decline back then between the Federal Land Bank and the PCA. They were land grabbing. Farmers overextended themselves, borrowed too much money with the PCA and the Federal Land Bank eagerly loaning them money to grow. But bottom line was farmers can't control grain prices, and inflation at that time, post Jimmy Carter, was it was insane.
Yeah.
And so you had interest rates jumping to 13, 14, 16, 18%. Well, the farmers were just collapsing. So by the time I got out of school, agriculture was not even on the radar.
So straight out of school, they asked you to give this invocation. You get kind of like your speaking chops. You go straight into what?
Well, at that time, I went to Hobart because there were no ag jobs.
Yeah.
So I did all the welding on the farm. So then I went to Hobart, which is the School of Welding in Troy, Ohio, and came back and worked for a company called Anderson Tool and Engineering as a precision welder. And about 3.5 years into that, I looked around and I saw that most of the old welders, no offense to the old welders, were alcoholics, miserable, broke down. And at that time, I was probably 24, 25 years old. And I said, this is not the path I want to be in. So backing up just a little, in 1986, I was approached to coach my high school team that I graduated from, Daleville High School, to coach the wrestling team. And so I went in. We had a fair amount of success doing that. A little company out of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, called Life Investors was recruiting teacher coaches at the time. And they had recruiters come in and approach me about selling life insurance. And so I said, well, let's try this. And it's usually a part-time gig. So you're doing it what we call twin career. You'd sell life insurance on the side. But I soon realized this is what I want to do. I want to be in the business world. I want to be an entrepreneur. So that's when I made the leap and went full time.